Hi, so I'm going to discuss Chapter 23, Question 3, which just basically talks about the advantages of the patient simulation lab and video collaboration, and also the use of the simulation lab in nursing education. So in this chapter, it had a box basically explaining the advantages of it, and just a few of them that I'd like to point out are providing a safe environment for people to practice their skills in, being able to master skills due to having such a good environment is definitely played a role in this simulation lab, especially when I had my experience with it. Also, everybody's learning the same skills in there, so the equality of the skills being performed is equal throughout and for everyone, so that everyone takes the same evidence-based practice and uses it in the clinical setting. Another advantage is you get to reuse the equipment. So after the initial expensive purchase of the simulation lab, you get to reuse the equipment, and therefore it cuts back instead of always rebuying. So that's really helpful. That's an advantage of it too. Another advantage that I read about in the book is being able to perform critical and acute scenarios without, patient harm, obviously, because it's on mannequins. So what happens with the simulation lab, which this goes into the nursing education, I graduated high school, went straight into nursing school at Queens in the ASN program. I was 18 when I started. So starting nursing school and, fundamentals from the get-go, you're practicing how to put in needles and how to change Foleys and do dressing changes and taking out Foleys and wound changes and all kinds of different skills that's important for you to know. So it was really nice to use the patient simulation lab to learn these skills, get checked off on them so that I could perform them in the clinical setting. And my first rotation, I think, was ortho, if I remember correctly. So it was really useful. Every time I used the simulation lab throughout the nursing program, which was once a semester, you get a scenario based on what you're learning about. So in pediatrics, I had a pediatric patient. In maternity, I had a maternity patient, or a woman in labor. In adult, you had adult patients. And so it was really nice to be able to practice on something that you're learning about. And you get to develop these skills and get checked off and really have time to stop and think, what do I need to do next? So basically, to set up the scenario, you'd have a pre-conference, and the pre-conference is where you and your classmates would sit with your faculty and talk about, what's the diagnosis, how does this happen, what's some nursing interventions for it, how would you implement them, who would you talk to, and just basically a bunch of information to allow you to think before you go and actually do the scenario. So I do wholeheartedly believe in the see one, do one, teach one method in nursing, because it's very important to know what you're doing before you go and actually do it. So this is, bringing back the advantages into what I'm talking about, being able to mentally get where you're about to go and performing the skills. It's an amazing experience. So once you do pre-conference, you go in there and it's normally a group and you get assigned roles. One's the recorder, one's the assessor, and blah, blah, blah. And the faculty member is basically the voice of the mannequin. And so this mannequin, it's presented in a certain way where the mannequin or your patient has complaints and they have assessments and they're real life and they can talk to you, oh, well, my heart's hurting. And then you get to think, oh, what do I need to do? This patient's complaining of chest pain. So it's really nice that the scenario is not always ran the same every time. And so therefore you can really learn to adapt based on what the faculty says, and you get to learn who you need to call, like the doctor, and what the nurse herself can do, and really how to assess patients. And so it's a very useful tool. So after you perform the scenario, you get to go to post-conference, and post-conferences is where you get to discuss what happened and if things needed to be changed, how you change it, what you did right, what you did wrong, and it just basically allows you to reiterate the information that you just got to practice. And that is just as important as the scenario. It really makes you think. It also makes you really focus on what you just did. And I think that's very important when trying to remember information, especially because, if you were in real life and you were practicing, nobody wants to be practiced on. When we go into a patient's room, we're not supposed to act like it's the first time we've ever, performed that skill. So being able to practice on a mannequin, yeah, it's not a real patient, but it is practice for us. And so it was very, very, very useful. I loved the patient simulation lab. I highly encourage people to do the simulation lab and take it as serious as a real patient, because that's where you develop communication skills, which is another advantage that was talked about in the book. Developing these communication skills, we use them every day in nursing. And if some of you guys remember nursing school, like 101, basically the only communication you get as a student nurse is with your classmates and with your instructor. And occasionally, if you got a really good nurse who actually wanted a student, then they would talk to you. But other than that, you basically, you didn't talk to doctors, you didn't talk to CNAs really, unless they were telling you to do a bath. It was just, you didn't get to communicate really. So developing communication in the simulation lab by saying who you'd call, what you do, is also a really great advantage to having it in the nursing education, because it teaches you that, and also it's an advantage to the patient simulation lab. More learning experience, fantastic. The third part of this question, question 3, is about video collaboration, which is basically kind of what we're doing now in this class. Is what I think is, I don't live in Charlotte, but I have a video and my classmates can see me, and a lot of us don't live in Charlotte. And so using video, it's able to communicate without actually being present and still being, involved with each other in our learning settings. And I think that that's very awesome. My grandpa was hospitalized for a stroke, and he was in CMC, and I remember seeing a computer screen on the wall and asking, "Oh, what's that?" And they would say that it was the basically video collaboration, where the doctor could come on the screen and they can look at the patient if there was like a code coming, or just to assess the patient if they in case of a crisis. Also, that doctor could come and speak to the family without actually being there, and they can answer questions, they can sign off orders, they could write orders. Just, it was really cool because it saves time. The doctors don't actually have to round on every patient, but they can, round and come on the screen whenever needed, if needed. And it's also another way for them to check in, which they could check in multiple times if they don't have to keep rounding to the same unit. And I just think that it's very convenient, very awesome. Technology is always changing and always improving, and I think that nursing and nursing education and just the improving technology should be taken advantage of while we can do it. All right. Thank you.